All right, Doug, thank you for chatting with me today. I'm curious if there's anything that you are hoping comes out of this Arizona trial that we didn't know about or haven't heard about based on the Idaho trials.
Well, I think that the main thing is there's a lot of information as it relates to Charles Vallow's death that has was not part of the Idaho case, and so clearly that's the charges that are being pursued in Arizona, and so I'm looking forward to seeing some of those details come out and to have a chance to um, get an optic of what that case looks like and the investigation that unfolded in Arizona. We had some coordination with the authorities in Arizona, but certainly they're two separate cases, two separate events, at least separate in time, maybe not necessarily separate in terms of the conspiracy involved, but it'll be good to see this part of the case further explored.
You were involved so much in extracting all that data, the text messages and everything that we heard so much about in the first two trials in Idaho. I would imagine some of that will come into play here too, especially the texts the night before Charles was killed.
Yeah, there will be a little bit of that, but keep in mind we have there's a gap there, and to me, that's always been something I've been curious about. It's something that I don't think we'll ever have insight into, and that is when Lori and Chad began their affair. Both were married to their respective spouses, and we know for a fact that they were using what I refer to as burner phones or other means of communication. And we also know that Charles Vallow had access to Lori Vallow's iCloud account and emails and messaging that would be stored in the iCloud account. And so from the time frame when they began their affair up until subsequent to Charles's death, there's a black hole essentially that we can't fill because they were using other means of communication. So we do see a few of those texts as, and that's really the very beginning of our visibility is 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 that those few communications prior to Charles's death, but the vast majority of all of their planning was not visible to us because of that.
Interesting. Yeah, I had forgotten about that. So basically, from the fall of 2018 until July-ish of 2019, there's not much there.
Correct.
Hmm.
Absolutely correct. Yeah.
And fortunately, I guess for the purposes of the investigation, you do have the text where, she's telling Alex, I need you to stay with me the night before Charles was killed. I need you to be close,
Hmm.
things like that. And then, of course, her movements in and around Arizona that morning and that hour after Charles was shot. I want to ask you, Doug, what did you think of her interview with Dateline?
Oh, I was disappointed. I think she bullied Keith Morrison. I think she was very aggressive and dominated that conversation and tried to control where it would go. And I would have liked to have seen her held to better account and to pin her down. What she was saying was so refutable based on evidence that was introduced at trial that was directly contradictory to her statement, and in fact, evidence that was produced by herself in terms of the photographs. So, her stories of what Tylee did, and or and then her subsequent death. It's very easy to say that's impossible, and it's impossible based on photographs that you took yourself. And so I would have liked to have seen her pushed and held down, saying, that's not true. It's simply not true. And we don't have to be there. We can show that by virtue of um, essentially irrefutable evidence that was presented at your trial.
Were you surprised at all with her demeanor? The fact she was so, I don't want to say narcissistic. Many people say narcissistic into herself. Did that surprise you at all how she behaved?
It didn't necessarily surprise me. The other thing to keep in mind is that from day one, with the exception of the interaction with Ron Ball when they did the welfare check in Rexburg, Lori has never sat down for an interview, never said a word to any investigators, despite multiple attempts at various times to speak with her. So, for those of us who were investigators on the case, um, subsequent to her being taken into custody, we've never had a single interaction with her. And so I didn't really know what to expect. I wasn't necessarily surprised by virtue of seeing what her demeanor was during her trial and the looks on her face during her trial. But certainly, I think narcissistic is not an inappropriate word by any means. And I think that's very telling that she, is obviously very, very self-centered, and her level of aggression was uh, maybe unexpected. I guess I wasn't quite sure what to expect because we just hadn't been in front of her in that way.
Right. You worked for the FBI for so many years. How many years?
27.
27 years. Have you ever seen a defendant do a national television interview weeks before they're on trial for conspiracy to commit murder?
No, no, it's very uncommon. And that's, I think, one of the challenges for the investigators, the prosecutors in this case, in terms of um, I've been involved in a lot of homicide cases. I've investigated a lot of homicides, some that included multiple homicides. But um, in terms of media attention and media scrutiny and the desire of the public to kind of have an optic and be involved, and obviously all of that, um, as our capabilities to have a national and an international audience expand in modern times, that's a challenge that I hadn't seen in other cases much earlier in my career. And so um, I think from the Idaho case, we had pretty much a hard and fast rule that until both cases had gone to trial and both cases had been adjudicated, that we weren't going to have any involvement with the media. I think that was the right decision to protect the prosecution, and but to see the defendant, who's acting as her own attorney, engage with the media is something I haven't seen before. Um, but you also don't see a lot of defendants acting as their own attorneys and charting their own course
Right. How do you foresee
in that
that
regard.
happening?
What's that?
How do you foresee that happening going over the next few weeks when the trial begins?
Not well. And that's mainly because uh, trial is a very complicated thing. There are a lot of rules and procedures that must be followed. There's uh, there's allowed types and lines of questioning for both prosecution and defense in terms of who can ask leading questions, who's prohibited from asking leading questions. And so, for someone who's not been to law school, who has no uh, trial lawyer experience to act as their own attorney, I just think from a procedural standpoint, it's going to be difficult.
Right. Are you going to watch?
No, no, I, I've I've got other. I'm busy enough as it is, and I'll I'll tune in to watch your recaps, but no, I don't plan on watching the trial.
Watching. Have you kind of put that chapter of your life behind you at this point?
Yeah, I think so. We've got so much work to do, and um, I think part of what Lori wants is her uh, time in the limelight, and I think that's the flip side to the media coverage, the right to the for the public to be informed, um, as well as which I agree with, but to to give her the opportunity to be in the spotlight, so to speak, is that's a little hard to swallow, from my perspective, because I think that's what she wants and she's enjoying that, and I hate to see her get that.
You have better things to do.
Yeah.
Much better. Tell me what you do. Tell in general, what does a law enforcement officer do to prepare to testify in these really high profile cases?
Well, for me, it's all about really rehearsing, not rehearsing, but committing to memory as best as possible all of the pertinent facts about which you are going to be called on to testify. So, um, and that can be difficult because typically trial and the investigation are separated by quite a number of months or even years. In this case, we we arrested Chad in June of 2020. Lori had been arrested, I think, in February of that year, and it was not until 2024, correct? Was that the first trial?
2023.
2023.
Yeah.
23 was the first trial. And so the things that are vivid in your memory at the time that you're conducting the investigation and they're fresh in your mind, um, a lot has happened since then, and for all of us, this isn't our only case, and so there are still a lot of other things happening and a lot of other cases and a lot of other details that we're dealing with, other crimes that we're investigating, and so um, it's important for me personally to always be well prepared to testify, to try to anticipate what questions might be asked by defense. You typically have time to prepare with the prosecutor over what types of questions that you're going to be asked, but you can't anticipate where the defense. You can't know in advance where the defense is going to go, and so really, it's just about reviewing the material. In this case, the material was incredibly voluminous, and so preparing for trial presented a challenge because of simply the sheer volume of information that we had to review time and again in order to get ready.
Right. And I remember clearly those PowerPoints that you put together all with all of that data. Weren't you called to testify two times in the trials?
Yes.
In both trials, you took the stand twice.
No, in the first trial, it was just once.
Okay.
And then in the second trial, we decided if we were able and had agreements in advance, which we were able to hash that out, that splitting my testimony up would be a better way of presenting that amount of information, which, as you saw, was quite a bit. And so splitting it up in the second trial was what we decided to do.
Yeah.